Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. Welcome to another sketchbook session video. This is the third one in the series. I'll link the series playlist in the description area if you haven't already watched the first two videos. The following sessions were filmed when I wasn't feeling inspired. I think this happens to most artists. You need to find what works best for you, but I'll show you how I deal with it in my art practice. I tend to push through it and work in a sketchbook. The sketches are usually very messy, some may say chaotic, definitely not beautiful fine art. I wanted to share these sessions to show another way to use a sketchbook and hopefully encourage you to give it a try when you're feeling uninspired. Don't worry if you create a mess, it's your sketchbook, nobody needs to see it. Before we get started, I want to mention that besides being edited, most of the video is sped up. The raw footage was over an hour and a half long. With all that said, let's get into the sketching sessions. If this is the first video in this series you're watching, I want to mention that I like to put wax paper behind the pages in this book turned sketchbook to protect the other pages. I didn't glue any of the pages together to strengthen them, so the paint may seep through. For this first page, I'm using red oxide and emerald green acrylic paint that I want to try using up, and yellow oxide that the bottle is almost empty. Also, the brush is one that I purchased at a hardware store. These sessions are a good time to use art supplies such as paints that you usually don't gravitate towards or paint bottles that are almost empty. It helps to alleviate the decision on what paint colors to use. Also, think about using old brushes or brushes that are sold at hardware stores. When I create when I'm not inspired, I don't have a design plan. I'm just putting paint to paper. It's more of an expression or intuitive motion. I brought out a thin brush handle to add some scratching marks over the page. I really love this technique. While I'm contemplating my next move on this first page, I'm going to start working on the corresponding one. I brought out this almost empty bottle of Celadon. Using the same hardware store brush, I'm applying the paint all over the surface, mixing in a bit of the leftover emerald green paint to the Celadon. Again, I'm bringing in a thin brush handle to make marks on the paint. This technique works best when the paint is thick. When I'm stuck, I usually bring out an old book page for collage. I have tons of this ephemera in my stash since I use old books in my art practice. Pro tip, read the text on the page to make sure there aren't any offensive words or sentences before gluing it down. This is an old tea bag that I painted red marks on it. You can use a glue stick to adhere it to the page. If you're using this type of ephemera for artwork to sell, I recommend using a matte medium, either gel or liquid. It has a stronger hold and the tea bag will be more transparent. A friend gifted me this yellow tool. He couldn't remember exactly where he purchased it, either Home Depot or Lowe's. It's a great tool to smooth out ephemera, especially transparent ones. Next, I brought out a black China marker. Since I'm being messy and loose, I decided to use my non-dominant hand to draw with it. I'll use the same technique when drawing with this Mitsubishi pencil. I'm using the Prussian blue end of the pencil. Continuing to switch back and forth between the two pages, I'm adding marks using this Pentel oil pastel in yellow ochre. Then one in Van Dyke brown. The Van Dyke brown marks didn't stand out, so I'm using the black China marker to add contrast. Next, I'm using dark blue deep to paint a bold mark using this old brush. This loopy shape has become one of my go-tos. The left page needed another light element for contrast, so I added another scrap of the book page. In hindsight, I should have painted the right area of the page first, then use the brush handle to scratch the surface, then paint the left side and scratch the paint. It was warm in my studio that day, so the paint was drying very fast, so the technique wasn't working as well as I had hoped. I would have preferred that the Celadon ground showed through more than it did. And finally, I used vermilion side of the pencil to add marks to trace the dark blue shape. Here are the first two sketches, messy and loose. Let's go on to the next session. I'm starting this next session with using almost empty bottles of Blick's matte acrylic paints in dark blue light and yellow bright, and these old flat brushes in 3/4 inch and 1 inch. I'm starting with a somewhat similar design on the left page as I did in the first session. Repeating a design helps you when you're not inspired because you don't have to think about a new design. That can add pressure that isn't needed. Next up, I'm using a bottle of dark blue deep to make simple marks over the whole surface. This is another go-to shape. If you paint each one large enough, you can come back in and add details to them with different color paints and markers. Once again, I'm using warm gray. I thought, why not apply it directly to the page from the bottle? I'm using an old gift card to spread the paint around the substrate. While the right page dries a bit, I'm bringing out yellow-green light to add some details to the dark blue marks with this old 1/2 inch flat brush. Then I'm adding more details around those marks with this pink oil pastel. Instead of applying the line around the whole thing, try adding a partial line. It adds an interesting detail. I brought out this water-soluble black Stabilo to draw a freeform design. I'm trying to become more comfortable using this drawing supply. I haven't found a way to use it in my art practice that works for me. I'm curious if you have experience using a Stabilo and how you use it in your art practice. Drawing a freeform design, then painting in the different areas can be an easy way to create when you're not inspired. I think it's similar to working in a coloring book. I'm going to continue adding different color paints within this shape. The left side has a nice pattern, but I wanted to add a bold mark. I brought out this Amsterdam Standard Series acrylic paint in Naphthol Red Medium. I think this is the only paint color I have tried from this brand. I really like this color red, and as you can see, I used a lot of it since there wasn't much paint left in the tube. I need to make a note to try more colors from this brand. I saw on their website that they have an expert series as well. Have you tried this brand of paint? What are your thoughts? This bold shape is another go-to for me. Painting an uneven width makes the shape more dynamic. It adds movement to the design. Now back to finish the right page, I brought out this black Posca pen to add a stronger outline to the freeform shape. The outline looked a bit uniform, so I decided to go back in and vary the line weight. This is another design idea that helps the art to be more interesting to look at. Here are the two finished sketches. I used some of the same paint colors on each one, but the designs are very different. Let's go on to the final session. Switching up the color palette, I brought out burnt ember, alizarin crimson hue, off-white, and yellow oxide. I brought out newer flat brushes in 3/4 inch and 1 inch. When you don't feel inspired, choosing a color palette that fits that mood is another way to work through it. I was feeling dark and muted in this session. I tend not to use much brown in my art practice. Besides representing my mood, it was a good experience to work with brown. I didn't really care for the color that resulted from mixing the burnt umber and the off-white, so I mixed in some yellow oxide. Doing this step warmed up the lower half of the page. Once the paint dried a bit, I came back in with straight yellow oxide to add another layer to the section surrounding the burnt umber. I continued to blend the burnt umber and yellow oxide until I got the look I wanted. Next, I mixed some off-white into the remaining paint to lighten it up. Once I started applying this paint mixture to the page, you can see the variation of color. I do like the mark when you just lay down the paintbrush and swipe. Also, I like the dry brush effect in the lower area. I decided to bring out some painted deli paper. I have a tutorial that I'll link below if you're interested in this collage paper technique. I'm applying the deli paper with liquid matte medium and a brush that is reserved for using with this medium. I find it's good to keep separate brushes for matte mediums and varnishes. These mediums tend to put a lot of wear and tear on the brushes. My plan is to put these circle papers overlapping, but not exactly lining up on top of the off-white yellow marks. The wavy line papers will be on top of the dry brush off-white yellow area. I couldn't find the yellow smoothing tool, so I brought out an old gift card. It works about the same, except that an old gift card has sharp edges that can tear the delicate deli paper, so you have to be mindful of that. I thought it'd be a good design detail to use two different circle papers in this area. I like to cut close to the painted marks so most of the unpainted deli paper is removed from the edges. Continuing to add layers on top of the page, I'm adding some painted details with the crimson paint. The bottom crimson wavy line hides some of the edge of the deli paper, along with adding a nice design detail. Keeping the old gift card out to add a swipe of color with the yellow oxide, then the off-white, and finally the crimson. I like to let each paint color dry before adding the next one. I wanted each swipe of color to stand out on its own, not blending into each other. Here are the colors for the next page. There's red oxide, naphthol red light, emerald green, yellow oxide, and off-white. I enjoy applying paint with an old gift card or credit card, so I decided to start applying the paint using this method. Starting with the red oxide, then the emerald green, then the yellow oxide. I love the area of the yellow oxide where the gift card picked up some of the yellow green. I made a note to try to recreate that look on a future artwork. Using a smaller card, I'm applying another layer of paint in short swipes of color. Instead of a bold swipe of color, I decided to try a geometric shape. Again, I'm being mindful to vary the widths. To continue to add bold marks, I brought out black matte acrylic paint and a brush that unfortunately has damaged bristles. I'm painting marks that somewhat mimic the style of the marks on the deli papers. Here are the final sketches. I think this session turned out well. There are some techniques that I would like to try again. Let's have a short wrap up next. I want to reiterate a few takeaways from these sessions. If you're not feeling inspired, try working in a sketchbook. Bring out neglected or almost empty paint bottles. Try not to overthink it. It's okay to get messy. Take your feelings and use those colors to represent those feelings. Remember that you don't have to show anyone these sketches. I'm showing you my sketches to encourage you to try this practice. I'm curious to know if you create when you're not inspired. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. See you next time. Take care.